I think there's 7 things that all Americans need to know about this Trump quote-unquote hush money trial. I'm covering this because this is such a hot topic on Fox News. I'm doing quite a bit of it. I want to give you the quick, down and dirty 7 things you need to understand about this trial from a trial lawyer in New York City. That would be me. And I want you to understand this because I think it's very important for our Second Amendment rights. I'm a big supporter of Donald Trump, and I think he is the best man for the job when it comes to the Second Amendment. We'll do separate videos on that. But for now, I want to talk about this hush money trial so you understand what's going on from the perspective of a New York trial lawyer. Stay tuned. We're going to break it down. The 7 things you must know about this trial so you're the smartest person in the room when it comes to this, in addition to the Second Amendment. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar, and author of Disarm, What the Ukraine War Teaches Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. All right, folks, so 7 things to know about this Donald Trump hush money trial, quote-unquote hush money trial, which I think is basically absurd. I think everyone agrees this is absurd, except the left, who views this as a great political weapon. We'll see how that works out for them in November. We'll cover that a lot more down the road. But for now, I think there's 7 things you need to know about this trial. Just as a jog your memory, this was, I think the first thing to keep in mind is this actually arises from events that occurred in the year of our Lord 2016. Did you hear what I just said? 2016. Today, we're in the year 2024. So the first thing to understand is, why has it taken 8 years for this case to get where it is? And how is it just so conveniently where it occurs in an election year where Donald Trump has to spend all this time in a Manhattan courtroom rather than campaign? So that's the first thing to keep in mind. This is literally about events that occurred 8 years ago. That's number 1. Number 2 is there's no victims here. Usually when you're dealing with a criminal case, there's a victim. You have someone that says, I was hit over the head with a bottle and he did it. Or I was beat up and he did it. Or someone stole my money and she did it. You see what I'm saying? You have crime victims that take the stand that says that person did something bad to me, they stole my money, they beat me up, they committed a crime against me in some way. But here, there's no victim. That could play a big role in this trial because at the end, who exactly is the victim? And of course, the argument that the government seems to be trying to develop, this is Alvin Bragg's district attorney's office, of course, is the notion that somehow this interfered with the 2016 election. We're going to get to that in 1 second. Now, the third thing to keep in mind is that the process is the punishment. The process is the punishment. Because again, whether or not Donald Trump wins or loses this case, he is already being punished, right? He's already a victim of the process, because not only does he have to spend every single day in a courtroom that apparently is freezing, he is simply not able to do things he wants to do. He's not able to play golf. He's not able to campaign. He's not able to talk on social media or to go on TV or to raise money or to do anything at all. The process of putting him through this in and of itself is the punishment. And of course, it's not only just taken away from his time, it's also distracting his mental energy. So rather than asking himself, how does he win Pennsylvania? How does he win Arizona? What does he need to do to win Georgia? He's literally sitting there, going through this trial. And of course, it's costing a lot of money. So every dollar that's being used here to fund this defense, to deal with these issues, is money that he could be using to, let's say, engage in election integrity efforts in various states. So that's like the third thing to keep in mind. Now, the fourth thing I think you should keep in mind, and this is my greatest concern, I keep saying on Fox News, my greatest concern is this fourth point, which is that this judge, Judge Marchand, has basically showed himself to be pro-government, anti-Trump every single step of the way. And my concern is this is going to become a Russiagate 2.0. And what do I mean by Russiagate 2.0 as my fourth point? My fear is that the mistakes, the legal mistakes and other mistakes that Judge Marchand is engaging in here will not be uncovered, found out, and resolved in a favorable way to Donald Trump until years from now, long after the November 2024 election. So my concern is, by Russiagate 2.0, is that Donald Trump is going to have to deal with this sort of hush money issue and what will likely be a conviction, because I just don't see how this process is going to be fair. We'll get to that in a little bit more in 1 second. And I think that there will be a conviction, is my best guess. And, he's not going to get this unwound until well after the November 2024 election, when it's simply too late. And that's why I think this Russiagate, if you remember, Donald Trump is accused of being an agent of the Kremlin, an agent of Russia, Of course, that all turned out to be hooey, but nevertheless, he was dogged with it with the special counsel and everyone else for years and had to deal with it. And of course, it turned out to be hooey, but the reality was it was far too late. In many respects, he lost much of his presidency because of this nonsense. And I suspect that that's what's going to happen here, that by the time these decisions get unwound on an appeal, if he's convicted, it will be too late to matter because it will be long after the 2024 election is over. So that's the fourth point. Now, the fifth point is very important. This is very geeky, but very important. As you may have heard, the charge for false bookkeeping records in New York is at one level a misdemeanor, a minor crime. And the statute of limitations, remember I mentioned this is like going back 8 years, all these events, 8 years ago, 2016? The statute of limitations for the misdemeanor associated with false business records has already expired. So how is it possible that the district attorney is able to bring this criminal case today, since the misdemeanor charge for false bookkeeping or false business records has expired? The answer is they are trying to bootstrap their arguments into making this a felony. And the way they've done this is to claim that there is a cover-up of a larger crime going on, and the cover-up using false bookkeeping or false business records to cover up a bigger crime is a felony, and the statute of limitations has not expired. Now, this is where we're going to get a little geeky. There has to be an underlying crime that was committed that these allegedly false bookkeeping records are being used to cover up. But now let's break that down in a geeky way. There's two possible theories or two possible crimes that could have been committed allegedly that Donald Trump is trying to cover up with these allegedly false business records. The first is a violation, and listen carefully, a violation of federal campaign laws. The second is a violation of state campaign laws, or state election laws or federal election laws. Let's break that down one at a time, and you'll see why both theories are really hooey. At the federal level, you have the Federal Department of Justice under Merrick Garland. You have the Federal Department of Justice, in a sense, under the Special Prosecutor Jack Smith, who's going after Trump in D.C. and Florida. You also have the Federal Election Commission, no friend of President Trump's. You hear what I just said? There are three separate federal agencies: the Department of Justice under Merrick Garland, the Department of Justice, in a sense, under Special Prosecutor Jack Smith, and the Federal Election Commission. All three of these federal groups, if you will, looked at these allegations at what Donald Trump did here, allegedly with these allegedly false business records involving payments to Michael Cohen, supposedly to settle cases involving Stormy Daniels. Nevertheless, set that issue aside. The point is, these three federal groups looked at this and concluded there was no there there. That's why none of them brought charges. So how is it possible that a county district attorney in Manhattan, remember Manhattan is just a county, how is it possible that a county district attorney can bring federal charges that there was a cover-up of a federal election crime when the federal regulators and the federal DOJ said that's simply not the case? They didn't pursue any of that. So it seems unlikely that that would be a federal problem, because the people that are experts in this area looked at this and did not think there was a problem. So that gives rise to whether or not there's some sort of state election law that could be a problem. Well, this is very interesting. Not enough people have covered this. There was a reference in court the other day to a New York State election law that arguably could have been violated in some respect. But what's interesting is, and I give credit to Business Insider here, I'll put a link to this article down below. The Business Insider reported on, when they heard this reference to the statute that is a New York State election statute, they reached out to a Republican election lawyer in New York State. They reached out to a Democratic election lawyer in New York State, and they simply asked them, have you ever heard of this law being used to prosecute anybody in the history of the state of New York? And both the Republican attorney and the Democratic attorney both said, no, they'd never heard of such a thing. For example, here's what a Brooklyn attorney who's a former Democratic New York State Senator, Martin Connor, said about this particular provision of New York State election law that it looks like Alvin Bragg intends to use. Here's what Martin Connor said, who's a Brooklyn attorney and a former state senator for New York. He wrote, quote, "I've never heard of it actually being used, and I've practiced election law for 53 years. That's Senator Martin Connor, what he told Business Insider. Now let's turn to the Republican. There's a Republican lawyer out of Buffalo, Joseph Burns. He's the attorney for the Erie County Republican Committee in Buffalo, New York. And when he was asked about this provision, this is what he said, according to the reports. Quote, "I would be shocked, really shocked, if you could find anybody who can give you an example where this section was prosecuted." So here you have the part of the New York State election law that might have been allegedly violated that Donald Trump was trying to cover up. I mean, it's a federal election. It's kind of hooey, but set that issue aside. You have both a Republican and a Democratic lawyer saying we've never heard of any such a thing. In fact, the Democratic lawyer in New York says he's been practicing election law for 53 years and has never heard of anyone being prosecuted. So again, Donald Trump is either being prosecuted allegedly covering up a federal crime, which the feds don't care about because they looked at this and didn't think there was a problem, or under a state law that no one's in the history of New York has ever been prosecuted under, at least as best as I can tell from the reporting by Business Insider. Now, the next thing to understand is the jury instructions. This is extremely important, and this is where I think Donald Trump's going to be in big trouble. This Judge Merchan, has demonstrated that he's pro-government and anti-Trump every step of the way. There's very little doubt about that in my mind. That's my opinion. Jury charges are extremely important, and a lot of lawyers overlook these, but I don't. To me, this is the most important part of the case, because this is the thing where the neutral judge, the supposedly neutral judge, instructs the jury of what the law is and what they're supposed to do and not do. This judge could easily, in my opinion, write the jury instructions with guidance from the district attorney's office so broadly to define the crimes, alleged crimes so broadly that a jury would have almost no choice but to vote to convict. And remember my point that it doesn't matter what happens 3 years from now if the conviction's thrown out because it's BS or a series of violations of laws or whatnot. It doesn't matter, because I think this judge is going to draw up those jury charges so broadly that basically anybody in all situations would be convicted because of the nature of what will be erroneously drafted jury charges. But it won't matter in the year of our Lord 2024, because by the time those wrongly drafted, this is what I'm predicting. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm totally wrong here, but I predict that the jury instructions will be drafted so poorly and in favor of the government that they will eventually get overturned on an appeal, but it will allow in 2024 a jury to convict regardless of the evidence, because the way those instructions are defined, the charges are defined, the instructions are given. That is my great fear from the perspective of Donald Trump. That's what I would be worried about if I were representing Donald Trump, which of course I'm not, I never have, but that is exactly what I would be thinking about in this case, badly drafted jury instructions that make it very easy for them to vote to convict because of the definitions and instructions used by this judge. And the last thing is just a reminder about this terrible gag order. Now, here's the way to understand the gag order. What the gag order is, it says that Donald Trump is not allowed to talk about the court, the witnesses, and so on. In the case, here's the thing. The United States Constitution is about protecting the right of a fair trial and the due process rights of whom? Of whom? Criminal defendants. See what I just said? Donald Trump is a criminal defendant. This entire case should be about protecting the due process rights and the right to a fair trial of Donald Trump, the criminal defendant. The government does not have a constitutional right to anything involving fairness. The government does not have a right to due process in this case. Donald Trump does. The government doesn't have a right to a fair trial. Donald Trump does. And yet here you have, and usually, by the way, what really happens in the real world is most of the time the criminal defendants do want sort of restrictions or gag orders because they're involved with a heinous crime. So if you've been charged with a heinous murder, which is high profile, and the newspapers are covering it every day, you want to try to restrict pretrial or trial publicity because it's going to influence the jury against you, the criminal defendant. You see what I just said? But here it's working in reverse. Basically, this gag order is being put in place to make it easier for the government to punish and go after Donald Trump, and to prevent Donald Trump from being able to speak out and defend himself and to rebut statements made by people about him in the press. So while most 99.9% of the cases is all about protecting the criminal defendant's right to a fair trial, here the gag order does the absolute opposite. It's designed to infringe upon the right of the criminal defendant It's done at the expense of the criminal defendant's rights, Donald Trump's rights, to benefit the government. The Constitution works in the absolute opposite direction, which is all about burdening the government in all respects to benefit the free American citizen. But this gag order that's preventing Donald Trump from being able to speak out and defend himself about this case works the opposite of the way the U.S. Constitution directs this judge to behave, which goes back to my point that I suspect that the judge is going to do whatever he can do. This is my opinion. He's going to do whatever he can do to make sure that Donald Trump is convicted, and it will not matter from his point of view that this is reversed in 2025 or 2026, because their theory will be that hopefully Donald Trump will have lost the election in 2024, and it really doesn't matter if he gets off at that point, because Joe Biden will get 4 more years of appointing terrible anti-gun judges and appointing terrible anti-gun bureaucrats and doing what he can do to upend the American way of life as we've always understood it. But only time will tell. We'll see what happens. Anyway, those are the big 7 things I think you need to know about the Trump hush money trial that you may not be hearing anywhere else, but I wanted you to hear it from me because I think you probably can trust some of the things I'm saying more than some of the other stuff that gets out there and about. So I wanted you to hear it from me for what that's worth. So there you have it. All right, folks, hope you learned something here today at the 4 Boxes Diner. Please subscribe. Encourage other people to subscribe. We're trying to get to 150,000 subscribers. Don't forget to follow me on X, where I have even more information about the Second Amendment and other items at 4 Boxes Diner. And we'll see you again soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.